Are you tired of sifting through endless resumes looking for the perfect candidate to fill a leadership opening? Skift Executive Search can help. We have an insider view of the travel industry and can leverage both our expertise and connections to find your next rockstar hire. To learn more, visit skift.com/exec-search or email us at execsearch@skift.com.
Hello and welcome to the Skift Travel Podcast. I'm Skift's Editor-in-Chief Sarah Kopit, coming to you fittingly from the beautiful new Istanbul airport, where I'm making a quick stop on my way to Dubai for Skift's Global Forum East. But earlier this week, I was in Dallas for Skift's Aviation Forum. And this week, you'll hear my conversation with Sarah Nelson, president of the Flight Attendants Union. But before we hear from Sarah, some housekeeping. If you're enjoying the pod, please like and subscribe and give us that good old 5 stars. And now, please enjoy my conversation with Sarah Nelson. All right. So we had an election last week. Republicans now have the White House, the Senate. They're just a hair away from getting the House of Representatives and a majority of nominees to the Supreme Court for generations to come. What does that mean for the labor movement?
It makes it a much more difficult climate for the labor movement. But what I think is really important to remember is that we have members in every single one of those states, every single one of those districts. We don't approach politics any differently, depending upon who's in charge. It's about accountability no matter what. And my experience is that when you approach it that way and you don't think that this is, that you're not going to get anywhere, that actually you can achieve results. And we've been pretty successful in doing that in various political climates. I'll say the labor movement across the board and working people being able to join unions and being able to strike and take on their employer and put a real check on capitalism, because I just want to be real here. The people that I negotiate with are beholden to the investors and the shareholders, and that's just the reality. That's not, I don't have a complaint about that, that's just the reality. And so I'm very aware of the role that we play as unions in those companies to keep the focus on the operation, to keep the focus actually on the customer or passenger once they get on the plane, and also to keep the focus on making sure that some of those, that the profits that are being generated are actually being shared with the employees to create a real healthy atmosphere where everyone believes that we're in this together to do this amazing thing, to get these big metal tubes up in the air and down safely.
Yeah, so this is going to be a great conversation with Sarah. So I want to just remind all of you, if you have any questions, put them in the app and we'll get to them in a little bit. So let's talk about Delta for a minute. So the Delta flight attendants have narrowly voted down unionizing a couple of times. And I'm curious what your status is and if you want to break any news here today.
So probably not going to break news here today, but just in context, yes, the Delta flight attendants have voted 3 different times. The first time was really just getting up off the ground, and we filed on September 7th of 2001. And then mail ballots were sent to everyone's homes from Washington, D.C. when Dan Rather was on the news every night saying, "Don't open mail from Washington, D.C." And then there was the aftermath of 9/11, and we really didn't have the ability to focus on anything outside the union. We had so much work to do to protect the people that we represented. And so there wasn't really organizing then. Then we fast forward to the era of consolidation, and Delta was ahead of the pack on doing that. And that's part of the reason that they're doing so well right now. But that, there was another vote just before the merger, and that turned out to be 40% of the Delta flight attendants who voted for that. Combined with Northwest, it seemed like that was an obvious win. There was a change in the organizing rules by President Obama to make sure that only the votes that are cast are the ones that are counted, just like every other ballot in the country. And in 2010, we narrowly lost that election at Delta. So it's been a long time coming. The big change today is that we have a positive view in the public about unions. It's one of the most popular things in the country. I think people are understanding that in order to get their fair shake, in this economy, that working people have to have an ability to push back and get some of that back. So that's in the communities. We're seeing more support from community organizations and electeds in Atlanta and other places. And that makes a real difference, because when people are just talking about that, it changes the entire atmosphere. And then we have a lot of hires at Delta, which is a complication for us because we don't have contact information for them. But we see people coming out who are coming from this Gen Z, understanding more that it's the collective that really makes a difference. And we're seeing a real difference in the way that organizing is moving forward. It's an entirely different attitude. And maybe if you invite me back in a few months, maybe I could break news then.
All right, that's a deal. You brought up Gen Z. I'm curious, how are the flight attendants union, how are you finding that cohort of talent? Are you having problems like getting them on board? Are they talk to me a little bit about what that's like, because I think for many people in the room, that's the up and coming workers that's the pool that everybody has right now.
Well, first of all, I'm really grateful to them, because I haven't kept up on technology the same way. And so I appreciate that they are bringing the union into the next generation here. I really enjoy working with them. They seem to really understand the basic principles of unionization, that we've got to look out for each other. We're not going to get anything done if we're not doing this together. They're facing existential threats like climate change in a different way than the rest of us are.
Yeah.
And so their introduction into the union is giving, I think, a lot of energy and a lot of excitement. Now, there's also complications too. They didn't go through the downturns. They didn't go through 9/11. They don't have that experience of those real hardships. And frankly, most of them were hired on the backside of COVID, because we did such a good job of keeping our airlines whole during that time. So those are some challenges when you have people who haven't been through the hard times. Sometimes it's difficult to say, we got to urgently work to get things done.
So back to Delta for a minute. They are one of the only US airlines that pays for boarding time. So, and that's unique. Do you think that is a direct response to union pressure?
It absolutely is. So we had worked really hard to turn this job into a career. And frankly, by the time that we hit 9/11, we had really just broken through most of the major discriminatory pieces that kept this from being a good career for flight attendants. So we were ready to move forward, and then it's been 20 years of austerity. And that meant cuts in bankruptcy, so no moving forward, which is also difficult for attracting people to the work. But then there was the consolidation, and usually that was about bringing two different cultures and two different contracts together. So it has really been 20 years since we've been able to bring forward the issues in the workplace at the bargaining table. And that's a problem. That's a problem for management. It's a problem for the flight attendants. And it's why actually the negotiations are so complicated and difficult now. What was happening across the board was that after the bankruptcies, when pay was stripped, when pensions were terminated, when people were willing to work longer hours, more hours in order to make ends meet, that's not really where people are now, and they want to get their lives back. And so there was a big focus on the fact that our days are longer than they've ever been. We're doing more boardings than we've ever done before. And so there was such a focus on the fact that flight attendants were not getting paid for these incredible responsibilities that we have with full aircraft, fights over luggage space, and also often medical emergencies in the middle of boarding, because it's often some of the most anxious times for people. So boarding pay became an industry-wide flight attendant demand. It was very, very clear. And so Delta went ahead and instigated that as the union was picking up steam. Yeah. We take full credit for that, but also, organizing is about lifting up the standards for everyone. And we got better terms under the American agreement and under the Alaska agreement that hasn't been ratified yet. But we're building upon that. And if we're not organizing and holding Delta to account, we're not going to be able to get these things at other tables, because management will say, how can we compete? Yeah. So it was a good thing.
Yeah, so, the overarching kind of argument against labor unions is that airlines will say, well, with all of these demands from the union, we can't be as profitable. We have to pass these costs on to the customers. Passenger experience will plummet. Can you talk to me a little bit about A, your thoughts on that, and B, are there any passenger experience kind of issues that you think have been a direct result of unionization?
Yeah, so passengers would not have the safety in the cabin that they have if it were not for our union. Yes, has our staffing been reduced? We have minimum staffing because it was our union that fought for that in the 50s. So that at least exists. There's not just a vending machine and fend for yourselves. And so that's a good thing. But if you look at, we were the first to take on big tobacco and get it out of our workspace. And how many people were so happy when they didn't have to get on a plane with smoking everywhere. We stopped spraying of pesticides that was getting people sick. And that was the work of our union. Oftentimes when you get regulations, businesses are not necessarily regulation friendly, but what regulations can do if they're done well is they can improve the environment, improve the safety standards, set a standard so that everyone is on board with it. Everybody has a responsibility. You're not just putting it on one company. And it's pro-competition because it raises the level of the requirements for everyone, and it's not something that one carrier or another has to compete against.
We'll be back with Sarah Nelson on the other side.
The countdown is on for our third annual Skift Global Forum East. Join us this November 19th and 20th in Dubai as we bring together 500 of the region's most powerful travel and tourism decision makers. With executives from companies like Emirates, Accor, Dubai Tourism, and Jumeirah in attendance, this is an event you can't afford to miss. Secure your tickets now at live.skift.com and get ready to connect and learn from the best at Skift Global Forum East.
Welcome back to this special edition of the Skift Travel Podcast. This week, we're hearing from the president of the Flight Attendants Union, Sarah Nelson. And if you're curious if she'll ever run for office, stay tuned until the very end. Yeah, so we actually heard Sean talk about health and safety as well, it being one of the big concerns. That's what keeps him up at night. Can you talk a little bit more about how the union is holding the airlines accountable, like the other things that, radiation and things like that go on in the airplane itself?
Yeah, so we know a lot about flight attendant health, and crew health is a little bit different than your typical passenger. There's a few exceptions to that. There's some passengers who fly just as much as we do.
Yeah.
So we are exposed to these things, decreased levels of oxygen, flying through radiation, much more radiation exposure, the disruption of circadian rhythms, which has a major effect. And if we're not bringing these issues forward and tackling them, then it's going to have an impact on the workforce. So we have also a much higher rate of cancer among flight attendants because of the exposure to these environmental issues. And what that means is that people are off the job getting treatment. In worst case, they're dying, and we're losing that experience. But that has a major impact on the bottom line of the company too. So getting at some of these health issues and making sure that people are staying healthy, wearing these sneakers actually means that more likely I'm not going to have the foot surgeries that every single flight attendant had to have at the end of their career, and the corporations were paying for that. We are working right now on a temperature standard. And if we had a temperature standard on board, this would be a good thing for the passengers. It would be a good thing for the airlines. It would have to require airlines and airports working together and support from the government. And it's a big issue. I'm sure everyone in here can think of a time when they were on an airplane when it was way too hot or way too cold. Yeah. And my best memory on this is as we were starting this campaign, there was a regional jet with these two pilots the two pilots who were fresh out of training and just being qualified. And the passengers were walking on board kind of a little scared, looking like this looks like my high school neighbor down the block. But it was freezing. The plane had been going back and forth between cold climates. It never got warmed up. And in the middle of this flight, while the flight attendants' hands were blue as they were doing the beverage services, the flight deck said, "We know it's really cold, everybody. We're really sorry. But if it's any consolation, it's colder in the flight deck than it is in the cabin." Okay, so these are the kinds of things that are going to happen if you don't have the unions able to raise these issues, tackle these problems, and work for a solution that is industry-wide that we're working on together.
Yeah. So I was just told that you've been named the chair of the Civil Aviation section of the ITF. So what's the plan? What are you going to do?
The International Transport Workers Federation, for those who do not know, and this represents 5 million aviation workers worldwide. Oftentimes in aviation, we want to harmonize the regulations that are in place so that there is good competition, but also that we're learning from each other and making sure that we're safe. It helps with the manufacturers too about the specs that they need to have on those planes as they're developing them. And so we are going to work on several things. We're going to work on beating back tiers in aviation where some workers are paid differently and have different benefits than others. We're going to work on sustainability and really lean in hard on making sure, as Robert Isom said earlier, we have to be real. We have to be real about the resources that we have, and if we're not leaning hard into innovation, we're going to be really behind the curveball and not be able to actually give a good passenger experience or pay workers well so that we have the tools to be able to continue to run the airline on the front lines. And we are going to work together on issues like sexual harassment and assault, and other big issues like clean air on planes, making sure that we don't have poisonous events where the running the air off the engines is pumping toxins into the air. So the issues are very similar across the world, and it is very, very helpful, actually, I think, to our airlines to have the employees pushing on the things that we need across the board so that everyone understands aviation is such a complicated network that really requires the entire aviation community to work together to get something done. And I think that we bring a lot of continuity to that. We've got an office in Montreal. We're going to be right there at ICAO, working on all these issues and trying to set better standards across the globe so that aviation is something that works well into the future.
I want to double click into the two-tiered employment system. It's been really controversial. What, in your view, needs to specifically change with that?
So the issue here in the United States, and actually around the world too, is that we have sort of the feeder regional jets that feed into the mainline service. That has typically been paid at a lower rate. The idea really stems from the beginning with pilots getting hours and moving through the system and working to get that mainline job. That got disrupted after 9/11 with all the bankruptcies. There was a stagnation in hiring. And there was also then the consolidation where these regional airlines were based in secondary or tertiary cities where the cost of living was a lot less. People could actually make their lives work based on a little bit less in their paycheck. But now that almost all of them are actually also working on jets, flying oftentimes on the same routes. If you go to book a flight on United, American, or Delta, you could look at the flights, say, just between Dallas and DC or Chicago and DC, and at any given point in those routes, some of that is being flown by regional jets, where the workers, the mechanics, the pilots, the flight attendants, are making on average 45% less. But now they're required to live in cities, live and work out of cities like Chicago, New York, San Francisco. It's completely unsustainable. And we have people sleeping in cars, and there's a problem, of course, with attrition as well.
Yeah.
And it's a huge problem. So we're trying to tackle this right now. There's a new template for a flight attendant contract that includes not only double-digit pay increases to make up for lost time, but also to add boarding pay, sit pay, some of the additional pay on the ground. and to be paying people retroactive pay for all that time that they have missed because negotiations have gone on so long. So really what we're saying right now, while we say equal pay for equal work is our overall demand, what we want to make sure is that in this regional bargaining, at least we've got the same framework in place as the major contracts so that they're not falling further and further behind.
So unsurprisingly, lots of great questions from the audience here. I want to get to a few of them. What were the most important lessons learned from the pandemic, and what would you have done differently?
So, wow. There's a couple things. Going into the pandemic, I think that we had a much higher rate of health and avoiding a lot of COVID deaths because 10 years earlier we had gotten OSHA on board, and that had been our effort to try to get certain standards for OSHA on board the aircraft. What that meant was that flight attendants got training on bloodborne pathogens. So when we walked into this, we had the exact demands that we needed. We asked for masks right away. We asked for gloves. We asked for other gear that would keep us safe. And of course, we had the hand hygiene before everyone else had all the commercials about how to wash your hand and sing a little tune so that you could wash it long enough. But so that was really important. We had a whole list of safety guidelines right away that we were ready to go with. But what we also knew from 9/11 was that this was a catastrophe. And if we didn't get in and provide a solution, there was likely going to be a shutdown of our airlines, a layoff of hundreds of thousands of workers, and possibly some bankruptcies too, more consolidation. And so we put forward the Workers First package that became the payroll support program, which was grants to the airlines to keep all the workers in their jobs. That meant we weren't losing our qualifications either, and we could come back and work again. And connected to our healthcare, really important during a pandemic, continuing to get our retirement contributions and paying into the social tax system too. So paying back into the communities rather than being on unemployment and a bigger drag in these states and communities. So that was really important. I think that what we certainly learned is that, or it was re-emphasized, is that in times of crisis, simple solutions are the best solutions. And you have to act quickly, but you have to be calm. You have to give people information. I liken it to the creeping delay. When you have regular updates from the crew about what's happening, passengers tend to stay more calm, as opposed to when you're not giving them the information and then terrible things happen. On the other end of that, of course, we had a lot of disruption with disruptive passengers. I think people forgot what it was like to go to the airport and actually take a flight. When they got back, we didn't have all the airport personnel back. It was hard to get food. It was hard to get things during that time. But I think that I give high marks to the aviation industry for becoming leaders. There's so many times when I've seen airlines and airports say, we're going to wait to hear from the FAA. We're going to wait for the instruction from the government. And when that wasn't there, and people understood that, and there was an effort to be leaders, to encourage people to come back and fly and take actions that make it safe, I think we got through a lot better than a lot of other industries. We learned a lot. I hope we don't forget that. I hope we continue to move forward, understanding that when we're talking to each other and working on these solutions, we can do a lot better.
Yeah, because it's not going to be the last crisis. Right?
It's not going to be the last crisis, no.
All right, so it's believed that the Trump administration may support efforts to make employee organizing more difficult for unions. Is that a concern for you?
It's a concern. I think it's a concern because if you look at the situation in the United States or around the world right now, one of the biggest problems is this massive inequality. And that is making people angry, understandably. They can't get the support that they need to take care of their families and do their part in each of our communities. So I'm really concerned because I have really learned in talking with CEOs who have said to me in private, hey, it's actually helpful when you speak up because these are not the kinds of things that I can bring up. And you're allowing me to say, if I don't pay attention to what Sarah's saying, she's going to cream me, right? And so it allows us to then get some solutions in place. I think it's a big concern for our democracy going forward. Unions are the last non-self-selecting place in America where people have conversations. So in a society that feels so divided and feels like people just go to their corners and try to make the best argument that will win 51% of the people over, you don't get to solutions. You get to a deadlock every time. And there's no way to utilize all of the ingenuity and innovation and real call for all of us to come together to solve these problems if you just stick in that place. So I think I think that undermining that union organizing and that union seat at the table is also, an even bigger stressor on our economy and on our democracy.
All right, last question. Would you ever consider running for public office?
So I get this question a lot, actually. It's a funny thing because the approval rating of Congress, I think, is lower than even airlines. So when people say that, I always think, like, do you hate me? But I also think, I did run for office and I won. I'm president of the Association of Flight Attendants. I think that it is really important that we have leaders that are bringing us together and provide a vision of hope and encourage the best parts of ourselves to come together. And we have lots of examples of that in history where that worked. And I think that if there's a need to step up and lead in a different role, that of course I would always consider that, but it's certainly not an objective of mine.
Sarah Nelson, thank you so much.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this special edition of the pod. To learn more about our upcoming Skift events, visit live.skift.com. And wherever you are in the world, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening to the Skift Travel Podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.